So just remind yourself, feet hip width apart, toes pointing forwards as much as possible, but maybe just a little bit turned out, maybe slightly turned out. There's a great deal of variation in human form. And mostly in Tai Chi and arts like this, we're told feet parallel. But plenty of people are just naturally built to have their feet slightly turned out. We don't want this. We don't want anything too wide. But on the other hand, if your feet do turn out, which mine do, they always have done, you don't want to just pull them in, because that will then tighten your knees. It's something you have to work on over a period of time until your body adjusts. Just that slight angle would be fine, as I said. But things to bear in mind: knees pointing in the same direction as your toes, which this can lead to a tightening of your knees again, a misalignment of your knees. And your feet will define the way that you're facing. The other thing about having your feet a long way turned out is that rotation of the hips will involve a certain amount of closing down in this area, the lower back. When that happens, it's more difficult to get that other aspect of the posture from the other side, which is that as we drop our weight back a little bit, the pelvis just naturally tucks under. And if you're tight in the lower back, that will be more difficult. So these are things that we constantly work on in Tai Chi, trying to refine. Place your hand, one hand on your belly, one hand on your lower back, and just see if you can feel movement there, particularly in the lower back. It'll be in the belly as well, as the muscles expand and contract. You'll notice it's not a big movement. If I do this like this and do it to sort of create a big movement, you see what my knees are doing. So I have to be careful here. I'm still getting a little bit of movement in my knees. But this is just to really draw your attention to this center part of your body. You can do the same thing on your sides. And it's all part of this process of beginning to pay close attention to your body. Another one that I've done with you in the past here, again, I can feel muscles expanding and contracting. I can't get my hand very much onto the back of my shoulder, but just using that touch to build up a detailed picture of what's happening within your body. And this is, of course, useful for both mind and body. Useful for the body because if we're aware of something, we think, oh, hold on, it is tight there, or whatever, it gives you something extra to work with. Good for the mind because, again, this drawing of your attention in is really what leads us to this sense of quite deep calm and stillness at the heart of the movement. The other thing the hand on your back would do is make you realize that you've got a back. It's not so easy, we're front-facing creatures, but with Tai Chi, it's a very holistic movement. It's a movement that engages one way or another the whole of ourselves, the whole of the body, mind, in a very broad sense. And so, touching your back, feeling the movement in your shoulder, just reminds you that they're actually there. But the main exercise, of course, is to have your arms just swinging around. And once you've quietened your attention, just draw in some kind of image. Moving through water is the usual one, the most common one. But it might be, as one teacher said once, moving through treacle. Another common idea is that you can imagine that the air around you is a bit thicker than normal. If that's difficult for you to begin with, then a couple of things you can try. One is just sync up with water and move your hand forwards or backwards, forwards and backwards in the water, and just feel what you have to do to make that a smooth movement. Or if you go swimming or something like that, just think about how your body's moving. So our bodies naturally adapt to that. Another interesting one, I was teaching an outside session the other day. It was a bit windy, and of course the wind gives that denser feeling to the air. Then from this, just raising your arms. When we can use an image like moving through water, we will notice a change in how our body moves if we're still able to pay attention. This exercise does much the same thing, because we're now holding our arms in a definite position. So we're not doing this, we're turning the body, which means that the connection from your hips, from the center of your body to the tips of your fingers, is quite well defined. So your hands lower than your shoulders, just slightly lower than your shoulders, but your elbows hanging down. And then just letting your hands drop. So carrying on in a similar vein, just rolling your weight forwards and backwards in your feet. So if I come closer so you can see here, same stance, just let your hips drop back a little bit. If you're finding that difficult, this will help you with that, I think, and just rolling your weight forwards and backwards. So notice that I'm pivoting from my feet, and if I go too far, then I'll fall over. And I'll bring the stick out. Then I hit the lampshade then. Then when I stand, if I stand like this, the stick comes out more or less from the crown of my head. And what I want to do is to make sure that as I move, I don't move too far. So I imagine that I'm like a boat tethered to the pole in the sea. I can drift away a little bit, but I get pulled back. If I go away too far, then I start to strain. And really what tethers you to the pole, again, is your awareness of that center line. And again, as I go forward, if I hold my lower back stiff here, then I very quickly start to wobble. And likewise, if I go back here, I very quickly start to wobble. If I can just soften a little bit, I get a great deal more movement. And again, placing your hands front and back. And just feel the big muscles of the lower back, buttocks, hips, belly, making very small adjustments. And it won't be just those big muscles. In fact, they're responding. Much of the adjustment is done much more subtly, again on your hip. So this exercise encourages very small changes in your pelvis. And these changes are essential for our mobility and our stability. There are also movements that sort of atrophy a little bit as we get older and more sedentary, because if you don't use it, then you will lose it, is the phrase. We'll also notice in your thigh muscles changes in your hamstrings at the back and the sides of the muscles at the side of the body, and so on and so forth. So again, just that picture has now become a moving picture, constantly changing. And mostly our bodies are very good at just producing the responses to those changes. So we don't want to try and make them happen, but we might want to just analyze a little bit and work out why they're not happening, or where are the barriers to that? Where are the areas that we can maybe go in a little bit to improve that movement, still rocking forwards and backwards. And I would suggest it's quite good, quite interesting to try this on a piece of rough ground. You know, if you've got a lawn out back and it's a bit bumpy, or just somewhere where it's a bit bumpy, because that will change things. So you could maybe think of your pelvis and that whole pelvic region around here as being a bit like the suspension on a car or a bicycle. The suspension will absorb the bumps, and if those bumps are absorbed, they're less likely to throw you offline. The other thing to think about with this is the center line of the body. It's quite tricky, and it's not necessarily a fixed thing. It can change from day to day, but eventually we don't want to be here. We don't want to be here. We don't want to be like this or like this. We want as much as possible. I'm just trying to line myself up here, difficult to look in two directions at once, so that, roughly speaking, this line will come down from the crown of our head, and if possible, finish just behind the ball of each foot. Don't force this. And having got to that point, just check, you want to sit back a little bit, just allow your hips to sit back. So one measure of this basic posture, the Wu Chi posture, would be that our knees are in line with the balls of our feet, or at least no further forwards than the balls of our feet. And as we drop back, I'll show you again that movement. Our hip bone is more or less in line with the ankle bone. I say more or less. Nobody should come around with a ruler to measure this. So you could imagine a line down through your body, through the ear, and so on and so forth. Begin to just build on this posture a little bit. Sink your hips back and push up. Again, feel free to place your hands on your body, particularly that middle part of your body, because you'll get a better impression of the changes. And we should be thinking here, not so much of this, the knees going forwards, but of the hips going back. There may be a little bit of movement of the hips, of the knees, sorry, going forwards. But that's why we aim to have the knees no further forwards than above the ball of the foot. If they're already here, then the slightest movement throws you completely offline. And what we want to think of, and I'll come back to this in the next stance, is if I were here, I would get stopped there. I get stopped by the ball of my foot. So if I'm going downhill, or even if I've tripped over and I've gone to here, I'm much more stable here. My weight will go down into my foot. But if I habitually do this, you can see I'm already, you know, my back heel is coming off the ground, and so on and so forth. So the alignments that we look for in this posture and try to maintain as we move as much as possible are alignments that we take into all the movements that we do. And again, you know, check what's happening in your body, but then bring your hands around as though you're cradling a ball. Push up, feel your body expanding. Feel how that expansion pushes your elbows out. Don't think of lifting your hands. You could imagine lifting something heavy. And if you were doing that, hopefully you know enough to use your legs to move the body. So for instance, if I take this is a 3 kilo medicine ball, so it's not that heavy. I don't want to do this. You see my shoulders are coming up and down. What I want to do is to drop down here, and then as I push up, that expansion of the body pushes my elbows out. I'm not going to turn my hand because I'll drop the ball, and then down. So if you see the action of my elbows, I'm exaggerating a little bit, and holding the ball exaggerates a little bit, but sometimes that can be a useful thing when we're learning new elements, new aspects of these movements. I'll try turning over, and here I sink down and see how my elbows come in. I'll probably drop the ball in a moment, so I won't do it for too long. And then you imagine maybe that the ball's in water. So there's, as soon as you start to push down, there's an instant pressure coming upwards. That pressure coming up is the energy that we refer to as peng or peng, depending on how it's translated in Tai Chi. And it's described as a rise and expand in energy. The traditional explanation for that, traditional image, I should say, for that energy is that it's the feeling that you get when you get a block of wood and push it down into water, or if you get a ball, you could say the same thing. So as soon as you start to sink, you're creating the potential for that upward energy. The downward energy, the yielding energy, which is enhanced by this posture. If I'm in good posture, I'm more likely to release tightness in the body and provide a free passage for this. If I'm holding my back tight, for instance, I get to here and everything's locking up. Lots of little things can put that out, but we have this free flow movement down. Liu is the term for that. I'm not sure if there's a traditional image for this one. If there is, I haven't really come across it. I should look that up. But it often reminds me of the kind of feeling I used to love as a kid when I had a bath. You take the plug out, put the palm of your hand over the plug, and you feel that your hand being sucked down by the water running away. And you can have that kind of quality about it. So between them, Peng and Liu, we have a cycle of movement, a cycle of energy. And we can feel that working through the body in various ways, filling and emptying, so your whole body expanding and contracting. But we can see they're interdependent. Sinking down produces the pushing up. Pushing up, eventually it gets taken over by gravity, pulling you down again. If we wish, when we're used to this, we can make it more precise. We can imagine the movement coming up the spine, comes right up the spine as you push up over the crown of your head, and then it's said to come down to the roof of your mouth. On the way down, goes down the center line of your body, and the two lines meet at the base of the torso. Then they represent two of the major energy channels, the jiao, meridians as they're generally referred to in English, although that's a little bit misleading title. They're currents of energy rather than physical structures. So that too can help you to focus. And it's also quite good if you're feeling tired. I find that image, which we refer to as the inner orbit or the microcosmic orbit, is actually a very good one for just easing some of that sort of tired, stagnant feeling out of my back and spine. And somehow just gives me this feeling of being a little bit more upright and open in my back. And once I've got that, then that's the support for the front of my body. So rib cage and all the internal organs can just release any of the tightness that they're feeling, and we start to get a better circulation. So we get the upward movement, sort of with this slight tingling, as you might describe it, going up the spine, and then the releasing movement coming down the front of the body, gradually feeling that all the internal organs are just being gently massaged, one description, gently bathed in energy is another description. From this movement, just going through the variations. As we push up this time, our hands get pushed away from our body. Remember, your body is expanding and contracting, and that happens in all directions. I've been looking at the upward and downward expansion and contraction, but think of your body as being a bit like a balloon that's being inflated. It will expand in all directions. And so again, if I come a little bit closer, I push up, and here, see how my elbow comes out a little bit, and that pulls my finger up. But here, my elbow's already beginning to drop. So it's like there's a bulge round about the area of the solar plexus. Anybody new who happens to be watching this on YouTube, just take on board as much of this detail as possible. But the way that we learn these is by copying the movements. So we start off learning what we might think of as the choreography, the external pattern. And then we slowly begin to notice the effects of that choreography within the body. And gradually that becomes more our prime focus. Not that we ever ignore what's happening externally. We never lose that sense. Tai Chi is an art that encompasses both internal and external elements, I feel. The same thing now with the next exercise, parting the clouds. Again, if I exaggerate, I push up, I feel the expansion, pushing my elbows out. I bring my attention more up into my chest, and my elbows get pushed out again, and then they drop down. There's only so far your elbows can do this. You don't want to get to a point. This would be ridiculous. This is so before that happens, you find that your arms are just drawn out a little bit. Don't think about it, but don't try and make your hands reach a particular point. Just notice how far they go. It's just parting the clouds. And so with this one, from the soles of our feet right into our fingertips, there's this lovely sense of the body expanding and then contracting. Now go back to the first of these and do these little movements in a sequence and see if you can just notice any changes and any similarities from one movement to another. Take your time as you change over, notice what's required to change. It's often a lot simpler than we think it's going to be. Here, for instance, your hands just drop down and your body's moving, you're still expanding and contracting. So the circle is a natural movement for your hands. But then here, we just let the hands, the fingers curl under, and we're back to the ball cradling position. And then to change from this to the wild goose, really all we need to do is rotate our hands out to the sides. Remember, it's the elbows that get moved first, drawing your fingers up and down. And just noticing that from one movement to another, the expansion moves up your body. And then change over. We always come back to this down position, this rooted position in between each expansion. It's a bit like watching the tide come in on a beach. Waves don't just come in and stay there. They come in and they withdraw, and then after a few minutes you notice that they've gone a little bit further up the beach, and then they've gone up a little bit again. And this rhythm from yin to yang, yang to yin, is the rhythm that runs through the whole system. And this helps us to develop a much calmer quality to the movement. We're not trying to achieve everything at once. We want to increase the range of our movement, of course. We want to feel that the opening increases. But we're patient. We know that over a period of time, it will happen. But here, for instance, no straining to move your arms. If you have an aspiration to get your arms a little bit higher, that's fine. But just be patient with that. We cultivate these movements. And like growing a plant, when we cultivate a plant, it takes its own time to build. What we do is we make sure that the environment that the plant is in is a good one, a conducive one to that growth. We'll do this little set one more time. And then just carrying on, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Here, the expansion alternating from side to side. So that dynamic cycle that I described, down and up, yielding and expanding, however you care to think about it, is happening all the time, all through our body. Gravity is always working on your body. The body's always responding to that in one way or another. We're looking for that springy response to that. So we know that must be happening, because otherwise gravity would just pull us down. But what we can do, again, with a focused intent, and this is important because this is where that calm awareness, that focused awareness begins to take a more active role in the movement. Our intent plays a more active role because we focus our attention on one side and we feel the movement up through there to highlight that process, and all the way down, not in a hurry, to move across the other side and then pushing up. And just again, being prepared to wait for the finish of the movement. Imagine somebody's talking and you're just waiting for them to finish their sentence before you respond, rather than interrupting halfway through. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Now, both hands now coming into play. You come to your hips and around in front, pushing up. At this point, you're not actually going to be sinking up and down, but you are wanting to keep your hips hanging back to allow that movement downwards through your body, and hence to allow the upward movement through your body. So don't stand like this suddenly. Now I'm locked up, I can hardly turn. But here I've softened in my hip, my center of gravity has dropped. And this exercise helps us to bring our attention back to this area between hips and waist, that kind of area, between the pelvic floor and waist, I guess, is a better way of thinking of it. And we notice that that's where a change takes place. Not up here, not in our shoulders, not in our hand, but we turn as we push out. That redirects our arms and our hands, changes the direction of their movement. Hands are doing the same thing in both directions, and as we face the front. But expanding and contracting. Expanding. And you can begin to imagine that expansion starting and finishing also in that central area of your body. Again, like a balloon, being inflated, it inflates in all directions, up, down, all around, horizontally, and so on and so forth, every possible direction. The downward movement is always very important. That reinforces that sinking, that connection to the ground. But apart from that, we then choose which particular direction we're going to encourage the body to move along. Try not to force that direction. Just be aware of the direction that you're wanting to go in. As we get more experienced at these arts, our bodies get better at obeying clear instructions, clear intent from the mind. And this is where body and mind very much begin to blend together. The very idea that they're separate is actually wrong. So when I talk about body and mind, even that is incorrect. But we have to start somewhere. We often feel that there is this separation between the two. Now, let your hands drop down with the same idea here. Just feel your hand being pushed away. Fingers are curled back slightly. That draws your hand over and then down. This way, this approach to this exercise is one that has sort of become apparent to me really in recent weeks. And I've been doing it for nearly 2 decades, or over 2 decades actually. And yet I've found that this movement has changed. It's much gentler on my shoulders now. So for the second stage of this exercise, I can now turn much more freely without creating any strain in my body. So even the most commonplace exercise, the ones that we think that we know, can often have more to reveal when we're just prepared to approach them with a little bit of openness, maybe experiment a little bit. I'm still leaving my hips sinking back, of course. So this is a constant for most of the exercises that we do. Change sides. See any difference between one side of your body and another. And if you can feel this smoother movement, then just have the idea as well that there's a wall next to you, maybe standing underneath an archway, and you're gently pressing the palm of your hand out, sliding along the arch, around the arch, just feeling the friction, but not enough to make it a strain. And then if it's comfortable for you, add in the turn. These opening exercises are deliberately simple because it's in these simpler exercises that we're more able to establish some of these principles, become aware of them as principles. More difficult, the more complicated the exercise is. So they're an important part of our practice. Now, sink down. Again, placing your hand on your belly and the lower part of your back and back of the pelvis. Feeling again this movement, how the pelvis just tilts under a little bit. But this time, do the opposite. Just have this idea that you're going to push back and feel the change, and then let your hips drop back and push up. And again. And notice what your shoulders and your head are doing. Be very careful with your back and your knees with this one. Let your hands drop down. As you come up, it pushes your hands out, and then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Push up and down. So You see from the side of what I'm doing here. Again, I'm going to use the stick. This is a bit tricky, so it won't work that well, but it will give you hopefully a visual image. My hips go back, but my head goes forwards, and my arms go forwards, of course. Now, if one of those didn't happen, if, for instance, I just leant forwards, I'm now losing that connection with that tethering post. Or indeed, if I just push my hips back, the same thing would happen. So you could see this exercise as a little bit of a test. How far can you extend out with those two opposite directions? Backwards with your hips, forwards with your head, shoulders, and arms, and not lose the balance, and of course not straining your back or your shoulders, and then just allowing your hips to drop back to bring you back up to the upright position. And it shows how we manage to find an upright stance against this force of the pull of gravity that is constantly working on us. And if we don't find a way of doing this, then that becomes a very destructive force if we're not careful. And then with the same awareness, polishing the table. We're going to do the same thing, but first bring your hands in front, you turn, you imagine your hands are resting on the table. Now you push your hips back, swing them around in the opposite direction, and come back to the beginning position. And change direction. Again, careful with your back. Careful with your knees. Don't do this. Then you see the curve in my back. Just let your back extend out carefully. A lengthening from the tail of your spine to the tips of your fingers. Very gentle. One more time in each direction. Good. Now, take a slightly wider stance. And for this stance, we do, most people have their feet turned out. Some people can practice with it parallel. But a slight turn here isn't a disadvantage, because now as you move your weight across a little bit, 60% in the full leg, 40% in what we would regard as the empty leg, although it's not really empty, we feel that, especially with the feet turned out, we're able to turn a little bit. So again, those initial exercises help us to establish qualities that we become aware of. We become aware of the technical side, certainly, but also the feel of them. And we get used to the idea, oh, you get to know when your shoulders are out of line. They will go out of line. And this happens in daily life. When we're in the supermarket, we don't sort of take time over our posture, we just reach out for something. So we do come out of that line. But the important thing really in those circumstances is to come back into them. So we're much less likely to hurt ourselves, but far more likely to maintain an environment within the body that allows for movement, not just when we're doing Tai Chi. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of exercises from this stance. They're a little bit more complicated. So we're sort of testing in a way. So your hands in front of you, turn your right hand palm down, weight in your right leg, go into your left leg and turn. Notice what's happening to the left hand. Your right hand stays in front of the hip, and your left hand just comes up. Your left elbow is above your left foot, and your hand comes up, looking out across your fingers. Fingers no higher than shoulder height. Come back into your right foot, turn your hands in to hold the ball, and then move across. Turn a little bit, do the same thing on this side. Top hand will press down, bottom hand swings out. This is parting the wild horse's mane. Be very aware that we're inclined to make quick movements. So although it's quite complicated, each stage is quite simple. So when we come back here, I'm not doing anything fancy with my hands. Here I'm just holding the ball. I'm not trying to turn my hands. Here, your left hand is palm up, right hand palm down. Sorry, the other way around, isn't it? Right hand, your right hand is palm up. Your left hand is palm down. You're mirroring my movement. And that doesn't change. It's only one place where that will change. Here, one hand palm down, the other hand palm up. You come back, and it's only when you get to this position that you rotate your arms, and now the palms are facing each other. Part in the wild horse's mane. And if earlier you were able to develop that feeling of moving through water, bring that back into the movement, and see if that actually invites a sort of change in your body. So this is a movement taken from the Tai Chi forms, of course. People actually present in the class, you'll know that. But it can also be the starting point for another exercise that some of us have been looking at. A little bit more complex again. So take your time with this one, push out, and then just let your left hand come in and your right elbow drop a little bit. Turn your body a little bit. Imagine your left finger stuck in mud, and you, for once, you do actually push up, but don't lock your knees. You go back, you pull the hand back, turn your hand palm in, so you're holding something between your hands, and push forwards. And then bring your hands over into your left, drop your left hand down, come back, and try that on the other side. This is the movement Y tape offers through, or one part of it. Here, just letting the body turn and then turn again. And here the fruit would be a peach. So it's about the size of a peach between your hands. They're not that far apart. Come over, but here it's a much bigger movement. And again, people unfamiliar with this, maybe watching on YouTube or whatever, you just concentrate on the choreography of the movement and just watch how your body's moving. This is Y tape offers fruit. Turn in to your left, a little bit back to the front, and then turn into your left again for the final stage. Coming over, turning, pushing out. Now you're turning to the right. That turn, of course, is in your hips and your waist, not in your shoulders. Shoulders follow the movement. They don't create the movement. One more on each side. Okay, and shake out. When we stand with our feet hip width apart, we actually have the space to allow our pelvis to hang down, if you think of it like that, or even think about your torso sliding down between your legs. That's helpful. It is possible, as we get more used to this, to get that sense of dropping down in all sorts of different stances. We know that. But again, we use this stance to help us to get familiar with the feeling of the process in as conducive a way as possible. So now turn your left foot out to about 30 degrees, step forwards about the same distance as the width of your feet, maintaining that width across the body, not this. Now it's more tricky. Again, we do learn to do that, but this is the practice stance that we use. Again, just dropping down and moving your weight forwards and backwards. This movement is from your feet. It's not your shoulders leaning. And again, we're only going to about 60% in the front leg, 70% of the weight in the back leg when we move back. And from here, hopefully you'll see that I'm maintaining that. Now hopefully you can see I'm maintaining that alignment through the body. If I do this, then I start to stumble forwards, which may be useful if we're walking down the road and we want to get to the shops. We can use that a little bit, but remember, go too far and you fall over. So that's when we want to bring the back into the practice, that strong feeling of hips dropping down. We found that all the way through the posture, but particularly in rowing a boat in the middle of the lake and polishing the table, if you remember. So there's always a counter movement to look for in Tai Chi, because the movement is all around the body. Remember the balloon being blown up, expands in all directions. Raising your toes and your heel. Turn the front foot out a little bit. Keep the hips dropping down. Just feel how this encourages your weight to move more fully into the front leg. While you're doing this from the side, notice, I'll have to do it this way around. I said earlier, your knee should be in line with the ball of your foot, shouldn't overextend. That's true for front and back foot. So here, when I raise my back heel, I don't do this because now my knee's overextending. I don't do this because now I'm falling. What I want to do is to get a stronger feeling of releasing and dropping through my hip, through the center of my body, whilst maintaining that alignment. There'll probably be a slight shift, but as you get more used to that feeling, that quality of being in line with your body, and we repeat that over and over again. It's a key part of the practice until it just becomes as familiar to us as the feeling of our favorite chair or feeling of an old pair of shoes or something like that. And then just stepping in, because now with less weight in the empty leg, all we really have to do is contract the leg, and our foot will naturally come in and expand the leg, and it will go out. It's not even really stepping. Stepping would probably involve some kind of angling forwards to help you gain a certain amount of momentum. This is almost what we do as a prelude to stepping. All the time in the back of your mind, again, a calm mind, a clear mind, a mind that is able to maintain a degree of focus, a degree of gathering, so that an image like moving through water is always with us. We're always in the back of our mind, not consciously, but subconsciously aware of the pull of gravity and so on and so forth, and our body's response to that. And then on the other side, as human beings, as animals, we are quite capable of retaining and monitoring information. Monitoring our environment is a very natural thing to do, very important thing to do. Monitoring what's going on within our inner landscape is a bit more difficult. We often don't pay attention to that, but it's the same process. But it does have to be trained for most of us. We tend to be very outwardly focused, and that becomes the habit. So the focusing on the inside has to be done deliberately and consciously, so that it can become just natural and subconscious to us. Raising your toes and your heel. Stepping in. Again, this is a key practice. So The image we often have of Tai Chi are these all complicated, these lovely arm movements, these very intricate movements, very flowing. What we've been looking at today really strips that away to look at what's going on behind that, beneath that, within those movements, looking at the movements that in the end will lead to that intricacy and that subtlety, the flow of energy, the coordination of the body, and so on. This time, expand your foot and your leg forwards. Time spent on these practices is never wasted. And again, going in a direction again and again, I find that they're coming back to something as basic as the stepping, which I first did in 1983, can reveal new aspects because we're constantly aware of what we're doing. We're not stepping along and looking at whatever's around us, the trees, or looking out the window of the room, or whatever. And just shake out. And when we do that, I say we're not. We do that, of course. We all do that. We all get distracted, but we realise it, and we just gently bring our attention back each time. In the same way as the movements expand out and contract in, then so do our thoughts expand out. But then we draw back. And we find that stillness, we find that heart of the movement, and then we're able to expand out again. So have your right foot forwards. Just do very quickly one movement of this. We'll do the movement, fisherman cast a net. So you go forwards, and as you settle into your front foot, that's when your arms swing out. Don't lead with your arms. Just leave your shoulders nice and loose. Use that momentum that starts with the pull of gravity down through your body and the pung, the movement upwards as a result of that. So you're still yielding, and it gets redirected through that center part of the body, this time into a forwards and backwards rather than a rotating movement. We did that with some of the movements earlier. But we stop. We stop here. Knees above the balls of the feet. And what you can do is here, when you get to here, rather than thinking about your arms, look for that further release, that further sense of letting go in the hips and the lower back. And again, just observe how your arms swing out. So again, a very simple movement, but one which teaches about how we can perform the more complicated movements without losing our stability, without losing our alignment, and without losing that sense of stillness and calmness and flow in the movement. Good, and then changing over, excuse me, feet hip width apart, torso sliding down, moving forward, as though you're moving through water. Use that image of a resistance to the movement to just encourage your arms to move in that stronger but more fluid way, more connected way. One more time. And then just shake out. So rub your hands together. So palms of your hands and your fingers a little bit warm and tapping over your face. And over your head and neck. Bring your attention back from whatever daydream, going down to your arm now, whatever daydream or train of thought has occupied your attention, the other shoulder. And you use the sensations of these gentle striking movements to help you with that. They bring your attention back into your body, lightly on your back. And then around your hips. Legs. Light on your belly. And the upper part of your chest. So quite a lot of detail there. Don't feel that you have to have taken it all on board. Heard it all before anyway. These things, again, these things become part of the cultivation of the process. Just a reminder that if anybody's interested, there's a day retreat coming up on the 15th of June. Get in touch if you want to know more about that. That's being held out in out near Burwell. It's also going to be online, so give us a shout if you want more details about that. But now, just bringing your attention back into your belly. Also, the other thing, of course, there won't be any sessions on Thursday, so there'll be no online Tai Chi on Thursday. So embrace tiger, return to mountain, sinking down again. As you start to push up, aware of the pull of gravity, making your arms feel heavier until they yield. They come around in a circle, and we start that process of coming back. Once again, both aspects are important. We don't just live our lives in little boxes, hopefully. We extend out. The tiger that we embrace is just everyday life, but we learn that we don't have to reject that, but can actually just sit back from it every now and then and touch that sense of stillness and calmness. One more round. Let your hands drop down. Just stand quietly for a moment. And shake out. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody.